and immediately I got smacked up beside the head and decided it was time to go take a shower. Julie didn't smack me upside the head. I just got to thinking, literally, that ain't right. I didn't. All right, Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. This is questions about the end time and events that we're going to look at. And Mark says, and as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Actually, that's not how he said it. Let me read it the way Mark wrote it. And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. You know how I know it's read that way? Because it's got that little exclamation point at the end. And you're supposed to really be excited when you see that, right? There's a deer in the yard, Julie. That wasn't a period. That was an exclamation point. So this disciple says, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. And Jesus answering said unto him, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another, and that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately. These four guys didn't ask him this question around the other disciples. They asked him privately because they were perplexed about something. They said, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? What are they wanting to know? They're wanting to know what time this is going to happen. They're wanting to know when this thing is going to be destroyed. As they left the temple, Jesus and his disciples came to the Mount of Olives that was overlooking Jerusalem. This is what Mark is saying in verses 1 through 4. And looking back, they could see the magnificent temple. And they noted that the stones were used in construction. One of the disciples remarked on the beauty and the magnificence of the building. And you know, historians tell us that some of these stones were truly massive. And if you study it and read it, some of these stones, anybody know how long 40 feet long is? I meant to bring a tape measure with me, Julie, this morning. But then I got to thinking on the way up here, I've only got a 25-foot tape measure, so I'd have to have two tape measures. So a 25-foot tape measure stretched all the way out, plus another 25-foot tape measure would be 50 feet, right? 40 feet long. Some of these stones were 40 feet long. One stone, 40 feet long, one continuous piece of rock. But that's just not all. They were also 18 feet high. How high is 18 feet? I'm 6'1". You stack another one of me on top of me, you've got 12'2". You stack another one on top of me, you got what? 6, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 3. So 3 of me standing up here and a 40-foot wide stone. That's a big piece of rock. These guys didn't have caterpillars. They didn't have bulldozers. They didn't have all the modern-day construction equipment we got now. They didn't have backhoes. When they built this temple, a 40-foot long by 18-foot high brick, if you want to call it that, Herod the Great had ordered this third temple to be built, and it had taken 40 years to complete it. 40 years to build this temple. No wonder they were working with 40 feet by 18-foot bricks. You think they'd cut them down a little bit. I don't know. 40 feet by 18 feet. It took them 40 years to build it. When I read that, I was thinking about how long it would have took to build this temple. I don't know, man. I don't know. But I also got thinking about when I was studying it, that Stone Mountain in Georgia, there's a hotel over in China, Hong Kong, that is made out of stone that came from Stone Mountain. And I remember when I was in the Navy, I was over there, and those were some pretty big, they weren't 40 feet by 18 feet high, but they were pretty big chunks of rocks. And Stone Mountain's a huge, it's actually the largest piece of granite in the world, I've been told. So I don't know how they made it. I don't know how they moved it. Took them 40 years to do it, though. And When I was reading that this morning, I got to talking to a guy at work whose dad died a few years ago. And he said his dad passed away, and I said, oh, this is 3 years ago this conversation took place. And I told him, I said, I'm sorry to hear about your dad. He goes, yeah, he wanted to live long enough to see Route 47 built. Or finished, completed. He wanted to live long enough to see Route 47 completed. I thought, well, he got there. And I got thinking, wait a minute. I've lived here for 18 years. Route 47 is always under construction. That guy just wanted to live forever. I see, and it kind of made me laugh. Anyway, back to this temple. It took him 40 years to build it. So Jesus gave a remarkable prophecy here, he tells them. He stated that the temple building would be destroyed so that there would not be one of these stones setting on another. They asked him what time this was going to take place. When's this going to happen? Jesus says the temple building would be destroyed so that there would not be one of these stones setting on another. This was an alarming statement if you think about it. They had just exclaimed, what great, beautiful, The Jews and the Romans prized the temple. The Jews and the Romans both prized this temple, okay? The building gave some stability to both governments. They were under Roman occupation. And the Romans normally didn't destroy places of worship when they conquered somebody. And the Jews used this temple as a sign of their national identity, even though they were in political servitude to Rome. And of course, since it had taken 40 years to build this temple, and it was a magnificent structure, it must have seemed unlikely that it would ever be destroyed. I'm sorry, but if you're using 40-foot long bricks and 18-foot high, what would it take to destroy that? I'm thinking a missile. They didn't have missiles back then. But folks, the temple was destroyed way before missiles were ever invented. It was destroyed in, I believe we said, what, Denny? 70 A.D. by Titus? By a Roman general, Titus, destroyed it in 70 A.D. That's when it fell. Anyway, as this group sat on the mountain overlooking the city of Jerusalem, Peter, James, and John and Andrew came to Jesus privately, and they asked him a question. They wanted to know what time, when was this going to happen? They didn't question or doubt that it was going to be destroyed. They wanted to know when. They asked about the timing of the event and the signs that Jesus said was going to happen. Jesus proceeded to deliver what some people call the Olivet Discourse, or what we better know as to preach the Mount, or the sermon that was preached on the Mount of Olives. And it's noteworthy that Jesus preached this sermon on the Mount at the beginning of his ministry, and he preached this sermon near the end of his earthly ministry. And this message was also recorded in Matthew, and it gives us an outline and an overview of the time between the first and the second physical appearances of Jesus. These teachings have always been interesting to God's people, but more so as we approach the end of this age, I believe. We all want to know what time it's going to happen, right? Wouldn't you like to know when the rapture is going to happen? No? I don't know. Sometimes I think about it, and I'd like to know when it's going to happen. Maybe I can have just one more chocolate milkshake. Exactly. When it happens, it happens. But most people would want to know. I think most people, if they gave an honest answer, would like to know when something's going to happen, when the rapture would happen. Well, we're going to get to that. Just be patient. I'm trying to point out the human part of this, all right? How many of y'all sit there and wonder when Denny's going to quit preaching on Sunday mornings? Sometimes I say 12:15. Sometimes I just talk to myself. He's going to go to 12:20. He's been surprising me lately. He's been ending right at 12:03 between 12:05. So you're way overdue for keeping us here a little longer, in my opinion. But I don't have a watch. I mean, these stupid things here have a clock on them now, and I just. I'm trying to point out how we are always focused on time. The question on most minds is when. When? When's it going to happen? Jesus didn't ignore the question either. And he did answer it last. You know, it's far more enlightening to focus on what Jesus plainly said instead of trying to look for hidden clues to discover what he did not say. I love the History Channel. I love the American Heroes Network because I like watching. I love studying history. I like watching it. I don't think they always get it right when they're talking about the Civil War and stuff, but I was watching a program the other day, and they were talking about the Bible. And these guys are trying to find a hidden, there's a hidden formula to the Bible, and if you read this, it'll point out that this is going to take place. And why don't you just read what it says? We try to make stuff way too hard. We try to make it way too... I think sometimes we think the more complex we can make it, the better off we sound to each other. I don't take that approach. Just read it for what it says. Read what Jesus wrote. And I say Jesus wrote it because it was inspired by God, right? The Bible. Read it for what it says. Quit trying to find hidden stuff. It's far more enlightening to focus on what he plainly said instead of trying to look for hidden clues to discover what he didn't say. It's difficult to accept a correct answer if we focus on the wrong question a lot of times. All right, pick it up, verse 5. Mark says, and Jesus answering them began to say, take heed lest any man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And when ye shall hear of wars, now pay attention to what he is saying here. Listen to what Jesus says. And when ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, but be ye not troubled. For such things must needs be, but the end shall not be yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and there shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginning of sorrows. A lot of times we like to read these verses and we read through it and we automatically think, oh yeah, World War I and World War II and Vietnam and Korea. And now we had the Persian Gulf, and boy, it's happening right around us. Folks, read verse 8 again. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdoms, and there shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and there shall be famines and troubles. All these things have happened, have they not? What does Jesus say, the last last 5 words? These are the beginnings of sorrows. It doesn't say it's the end. This is the beginnings. Verse 9, but take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils, and in the synagogues ye shall be beaten, and ye shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. And the gospel must first be published among all nations. But when they shall lead you and deliver you up, take no thought beforehand what ye shall speak, neither do ye premeditate. I found that interesting when I read that and studied that. How many of y'all stand in front of a mirror and practice what you're going to say before you say it? You ain't ever done that? I'm the only one that does it? I guess I'm weird. How many times have you ever thought about what you're going to say to somebody before you say it? Maybe you're having an argument. You just wait till I see. This is what I'm going to tell him. Or her. Huh? No, it never does it? Maybe that's why he says, don't you meditate. But whatsoever shall be given you in that hour, that speak ye. Now this is cool. For it is not ye that speak, but the Holy Ghost. Now the brother shall betray the brother to death, and the father the son, and children shall rise up against their parents, and shall cause them to be put to death. When you read that, what do you think? Do you see that going on now? And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. We like a lot of people like to get verse 13 mixed up and screwed up. We're going to talk about it. But in verse 14 it says, but when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. You know what Jesus just told me in verse 14? But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, maybe I should go study the book of Daniel. Too many people just like to read that, and then they don't ever go to Daniel and read what Daniel says is going to happen. What happened in verses 5 through 14? The key thought of this passage is in verse 5. There Jesus told us to take heed and not be deceived. To take heed and not be deceived. To take heed literally means, folks, to stay awake. Jesus ended this passage in verse 37, which we didn't look at, but if you read Mark chapter 13, in verse 37, he ends this passage with a warning. And his main point was that we're to stay awake and we're not to fall asleep. As this age unfolds, we should be watching what's going around us and we should be taking heed. In thinking about the second coming, we always want to know when it's going to happen. If we, in verse 32, Jesus said, but of that day and that hour, what, Everett? No man knoweth, right? No man knows. Not even the angels in heaven know. What else does he say? Who else doesn't know? Who? I heard it. The Son. Jesus doesn't even know. Only God knows. Now think about that. Disciples are asking Jesus when this is going to happen. No, Jesus answers them telling you. Basically, when God gets ready, that's when it's going to happen. Remember when I was a little boy, I asked my mom and dad, when are we going to get there? You ever been asked that question on a trip? What's Daddy say? That's not what my daddy said. My daddy said what you said to me a minute ago, when we get there. But of that day and that hour no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father knoweth. And in these verses, Jesus gave some signs that would not mark the end of the age, but these mark the course of the age. These things would take place all through the interval between his first and his second coming. That's a long time. History proves, if you look back at history, it proves that these predictions were accurate. First, Jesus mentioned the coming of the false Christ and the warfare. And he specifically stated these things would happen, but they would not be signs of the end of the world. These were going to be the beginnings, not the end. The beginnings of sorrow. He also mentioned that there was going to be earthquakes and famines and troubles, but these also were going to be the beginnings, not the end of the sorrows that were going to be associated. And at this age, and as this age has unfolded, these things have constantly happened, and they're still happening today. We live in an unsettled world, both politically and physically. And all of this is surely moving us towards the return of Jesus, but no one individual incident should be taken as the one sure sign. Okay? Because Everett, as you pointed out, nobody knows. The angels don't know. No man knows. Not even the Son knows. Jesus mentioned the persecutions of the saints and the appearance of his servants before kings and rulers. And this is part of a worldwide witness that must, excuse me, that must take place before the Lord returns. And over the centuries, how long's a century, somebody? 100 years. Over the centuries, many of the servants of God have been brought before human tribunals of one kind or another, usually with a bad outcome for the Christians. And through the centuries, Jesus was physically present on earth. Literally, millions of Christians have been persecuted and killed. And you know what? It's still happening. So it's not the end. It's the beginnings of sorrows, just as Jesus said it was. And in many nations, it's against the law to even read or own a Bible. We don't have to worry about this situation, because if we are ever called on to make such an appearance, well, what did he tell us? We have the promise that the Holy Spirit is going to help us say the right things. We ain't got to practice what we're going to say. You know what I thought of when I read that? Anybody ever read the account of I can't think of her name, the girl in the Columbine shooting? Where the... Maybe. But what did she say to the idiot, Dylan, whatever his name was, before he shot her? He asked her, "Are you a believer?" And she said, "Yes." She gave the answer. The Holy Spirit gave her the answer. And we're going to get to this part here of what I mean by that and why I brought that story up. We don't have to worry about the situation, because if we're ever called to make such an appearance, we have the promise that the Holy Spirit is going to help us say the right things to witness to a lost world. There ain't not a doubt in my mind that those boys were lost. That was her last witness, if you think about it. And also, the course of this age would be marked by the breaking up of the normal family relationships and unreasonable hatred toward those who stand for truth. Why does this world hate Christianity? You ever wonder that? What would happen if everyone believed in Jesus and followed his teachings? Would the world be a better place? Of course it would. Absolutely. Whatever else Jesus did, he never hurt anyone. No one was worse off for coming into his presence or hearing his words. Men may not believe the truth, but when they're exposed to it, they at least can make an informed choice. Jesus promised those who endure to the end would be saved. This is the verse 13 that a lot of people like to get mixed up and say that it says something it really doesn't say. He promised that those who would endure to the end will be saved. Folks, this end is talking about our physical life. It refers to our physical lives because none of these men lived through the entire church age. They're all dead, right? Mark's not still alive, right? Anybody seen Matthew lately? The beginning of the sorrows. Every child of God is called to be faithful unto death, are we not? And this statement is not saying that our endurance determines our salvation. That's not what it's saying at all. It's teaching that death stops all persecutions. It stops all misunderstandings. And as we approach the end of our lives, our salvation gets nearer. Romans 13:11 tells us. I'm out of time. I wanted to finish this lesson. We'll pick it up in verse 19 next week. All right? I want to point out, though, before we get to it, we're not talking about, I kind of hinted on it a little bit earlier, Everest. I'm not talking about, this is not talking about the rapture. This is talking about the time before Jesus physically comes the second time. The rapture is Jesus calling us home. The second coming is what all this is. So everything that we see now, the wars, the stuff, it's going to continue to happen. but it's going to continue to happen at a bigger pace. And if you think about your lifetime, have wars not increased? I'm 50 years old, and in the 50 years that I've been here on earth, wars have increased. Storms have gotten worse. So think about your lifetime, okay? What we're talking about is not the rapture. We're talking about his second coming. And we'll get to that next week. Lord, thank you for the day. Thank you for many blessings. I pray and ask